Scope is an important concept in programming, and especially in JavaScript, so it's very important for us to understand how scope works because it determines what functions and variables we can see and access in other parts of our code. JavaScript has a global scope. In fact, it's dependent upon this global scope. Any variable or function that's defined outside of another function are created in the global scope. So for example, we have a global function called shapeArea. It's not defined in any other function, so it is set to be global. We could create a global variable. I'm going to create one called foo. I'm going to set it as 0, and this is a global variable. We can access this foo variable and this shapeArea function anywhere within our page because these are global. So if we wanted to modify foo within shapeArea, we could do that because this is global and we can access it anywhere else. So anytime shapeArea executes, we are assigning a value of 2 to foo. Now there's another layer of scope called functional scope or local scope, and the things like this variable and these functions that are defined inside of another function as they are here are said to be within the local scope of shapeArea. So this is functional scope. All of these items, this area and triangle and rectangle, these are all defined within the scope of shapeArea. They cannot be accessed outside of this function. So if we were going to try to execute this triangle function outside of shapeArea, we couldn't do that. Now, one thing here, this little pop-up window is IntelliSense. This is a feature of Visual Web Developer Express and really all versions of Visual Studio. But IntelliSense is really nice for people learning a new language. It's nice just all around, whether if you're a professional or a beginner. It'll show you all of the objects and keywords and everything that you can use. As you can see, there's quite a few things that we could be using within this code here. Let's type something within our scope. And the IntelliSense here is scope aware. See, we tried to type triangle and it didn't show us anything about triangle because triangle is not in this global scope. But if we tried to execute shapeArea, we can see that here. So we can see how IntelliSense would be helpful to anybody using it. So this area, triangle, and rectangle are all within the local scope. They cannot be accessed outside of shapeArea. But we can access foo anywhere within our code because it is global. So inside of triangle, we could set area to foo, and then area becomes 0 because we are accessing this global variable here. But we can also change how this works by creating a local variable called foo that is local to shapeArea. So now foo is actually looking at this variable here, and this is why whenever we use an identifier within a certain level of scope, JavaScript looks in that current scope for this identifier. Since we are executing triangle, it's going to look within the scope of triangle first. It's not going to find a foo identifier defined there, so it's going to go to the next level, which is shapeArea. Now we do have a foo identifier defined within shapeArea. It's going to return, or it's going to see that, and it's going to return the value assigned to foo. In this case it's 10. If it was a function, it would actually return that function. So we have essentially assigned 10 to area here within triangle because JavaScript does not look past this foo. It thinks that it found what we were wanting, and so it doesn't care that there's a global variable here. So if we wanted to use the global variable, we would actually have to do something a little bit different down here, and we'll see that whenever we start looking at the window object in a few lessons. So we can override global values by using a local variable of the same name or a local function. It really doesn't matter. As long as it's local and we have a global of the same name, JavaScript will use the local whenever it's within the correct level of scope. Okay, so let's actually look at the try it section now. And let's see what exactly we have. We have a global shape area function. It accepts 3 arguments, a base, a height, and a shape. We use the shape down here in the switch. If it's triangle, then we execute this triangle function. If it's rectangle or square, then we execute this rectangle function. Now notice we're not passing any data to these functions. Instead, they are accessing these parameters here. This is because base, height, and shape are within the scope of shape area. They're in the same level of scope as triangle and rectangle, so we can use them inside of these functions. So for triangle, we are taking base times 1/2 or a half, and then multiplying that by height to get the area of a triangle. Then for rectangle, we are just doing base times height, and then setting the area variable as the result of these computations, and then we are returning area. So let's see how this is used. If we go to our HTML file, we have the external JavaScript here, and then we have some inline code. And first thing, we are using a global area variable. Now once again, we have an area variable defined within shape area, but once again, this is within the local scope of shape area. So every reference to the area variable is going to modify this variable, not the one here. So it's okay that we are doing this here. So we are calling shape area, we are passing 2 and 2 for base and height, and then we are passing square. So this will execute the rectangle function. We will multiply base times height, 2 times 2. We will set that to area. Then we will return area back to this global area variable, and then we will alert the value here. So if we were going to run this, we would see an alert box that says 4. And there we go. So it's very important to remember about scope, because as we can see with using multiple variable names, we could really mess up how our application works if we were to forget how scoped worked. So just remember that there is a global scope, and then there is a functional scope. And functional scope is local to that function. It cannot be accessed outside of that function. So if you just remember those things, then you should be ready to go as far as scope is concerned. And that's it for this lesson.